Hi, this is Tamara from mooglyblog.com, and in this video, I'm going to be demonstrating how to crochet the heart-shaped cloth, which is a free pattern you'll find on mooglyblog.com. Please go to the link in the description where you will find both right and left-handed video tutorials, and right under the video tutorials, you'll find links to the written pattern, as well as all the supplies you need. To make this pattern, you'll need about 50 yards of Red Heart Scrubby Smoothie, or you can substitute Lily Sugar and Cream if you prefer. You'll also need a USH 5mm crochet hook. These create a finished cloth that is about 9 inches wide and 8 inches tall. So if you vary the yarn and hook size, you can make different size hearts. Let's take a closer look at the heart-shaped cloth. The heart-shaped cloth, as you can see here, features the granny stitch. So we're going to be working between the posts for most of the stitches. However, we've got some shaping to do along the sides. This cloth is made from the bottom up. So you start working up to here, and then we'll need to do the top part separately. So let's go ahead and get started making our heart-shaped cloth. Okay, so to begin our heart-shaped cloth, I've put a slip knot on my hook, and I'm going to start with a chain of 3. And this chain of 3 will count as our first double crochet at the beginning of each row throughout the pattern. After that, we're going to put 2 double crochets in the third chain from the hook, so that very first chain we made. And I like to go under just the back hump of that chain. It's right there, and it's easy and ready for me to go right into. So there's 1, and there's 2. And that's the end of row 1. 3 double crochets, all worked into that very first chain you make. To begin row 2, we're going to start again with a chain of 3. And then you can turn or turn in chain 3, however you like to do it. Then we're going to put 2 double crochets right in that very first stitch. So since that chain 3 counted as our first double crochet, we could say we now have 3 double crochets in that very first stitch. Then we're going to skip the next double crochet there and work our next 3 double crochets in the top of the chain 3, since that was our first double crochet for row 1. So you want to take your time and get into just that top chain right there. Get under those 2 loops. There we are. And then go ahead and put 3 double crochets right in there. So then at the end of row 2, of course, you'll have 2 groups of 3 for a total of 6 double crochets. We're just kind of getting our granny stitch pattern still set up here. So there we go. We can see there are our 6 double crochets for row 2. To begin row 3, we start again with our chain 3 for our first double crochet. And then we work 2 double crochets again in that very first stitch. As you can see, this is really helping to create the beginning of that great heart shape. After that, we continue by skipping the next 2 stitches and working 3 double crochets between the previous and the next stitch. So this is where we really kind of get into that granny stitch style of stitching. We're going to be skipping those next 2 double crochets right there, and then right in between those 2 groups of 3, right in that space there is where we're going to put our next group of 3 double crochets. So we just go right into that space. Let me do that again here and get my fingers out of the way. You can see I'm just going to go right between that previous post and the next post with my hook. Don't have to worry about working into any particular stitch or anything. We just go right between those 2 posts. There we are. So now we've got 3 double crochets between the previous and the next stitch. So then we skip the next 2 stitches and work 3 double crochets in the last stitch. And of course, that's going to be the top of that chain 3 again. So you can see, hopefully now we're really going to start setting up that granny stitch style. It's just here at the ends where we do need to work into that first and last stitch of each row to help create that shape. So there's 2. I've got 1 more to go here on mine. There we are. So at the end of row 3, you should have a total of 9 double crochets in 3 groups of 3, just like this. To begin row 4, we'll start again, of course, with our chain of 3, and then 2 double crochets in that very first stitch. We're still working our way out and creating the body at the bottom of our heart here. So then, just as before, we'll skip the next 2 stitches and work 3 double crochets between the previous and the next stitch. So we just go right between those posts and work 3 double crochets. So there's 1 and 2 and 3. And since we're in the middle of our heart here, we can skip those next 3 stitches and then work 3 double crochets right in between the previous and the next of those groups. So right between those 2 groups of 3, basically. It's where we want to keep putting our groups of 3 double crochets until we get to the ends where we do our shaping. There we are. I'll pull up a little bit more yarn from my skein here. So then we are close to the end. We skip the next 2 and work 3 double crochets right in that very last stitch, the top of our turning chain, just as we've been doing before. Basically, we're going to keep repeating to build out the sides of our heart here until we need to start changing the shaping. But the interior section of the heart here, working 3 double crochets in between each of those groups, is going to be the main stitch pattern. And that's sort of the basic idea of the granny stitch pattern if you haven't worked with that before. So I've got to squeeze those 3 stitches there into the top of that chain 3. There we are, but it's done. And here we are at the end of row 4, and we have a total of 12 double crochets. Row 5, again, begins with a chain of 3. There we go. Then we work 2 double crochets in that first stitch. So there's 1 and 2. Then we skip 2 stitches and work 3 double crochets in between the previous and next stitch. So again, just right in between those groups of 3. So we'll keep doing that all the way across until we get to the end of row 5. So I'll see you when we get to the end of row 5. Okay, so we're almost at the end here of row 5. We've got 3 double crochets worked in between each of those groups until we come to the end, and there are 3 stitches left. So we skip those 2 and work 3 right in the last stitch. And that's basically the setup, the same instructions for the next 3 rows. Rows 6, 7, 8, 4 rows, 6, 7, 8, and 9 are all exactly the same as what we just did here. But of course, we'll just keep increasing by 3 stitches each row. But we're going to get that stitch back on there. We're going to keep working 3 stitches in the first stitch and then work our groups of 3 in between the other groups of 3, and then 3 stitches in the last stitch for the next 4 rows until we've got a total of 9 rows made. So you can sort of count your rows even by counting the groups of 3 here. In row 1, we've got 1. In row 2, we've got 2. Row 3, we've got 3, and on up. So you'll keep going until you have a total of 9 groups of 3. So this is what your heart-shaped cloth should look like after row 9. You can see here, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 groups of 3 stitches each. So 27 double crochets total. So now we're ready to begin row 10. To begin row 10, we're going to start with a chain 3, just as we have started every other row. And then we're going to work just 1 double crochet in the first stitch. It's time to start straightening out the sides of our heart just a little bit in this row. So then we skip the next 2 stitches and work 3 double crochets between the previous stitch and the next stitch, between those groups of 3, just as we've been doing before. So the interior portion of this row is exactly the same. 3 double crochets in between each group of 3. The difference is that instead of working 3 double crochets at each end, now we're going to be working just 2 double crochets at each end to start bringing that curve in a little bit. So just continue to work your 3 groups of 3 double crochets in between each group below, and I'll see you as we get closer to the end here of row 10. Okay, so here I am ready to finish row 10. When we get to those last 3 stitches, the difference is now we're just going to work 2 double crochets in the top of that chain 3, our very last stitch here. So as I was saying, that will start drawing in the sides of our heart a little bit here so that we get a little bit a gentler slope along the sides. Let me get that last stitch in there. Didn't want to cooperate. There we go. You can see now we're really starting to curve that back in. So we're going to continue that in row 11, where we start again with a chain 3. And then we skip just the next stitch and work 3 double crochets between the posts of the previous and the next stitch, repeating that on across. So this time we've only got 1 stitch there to skip because we only had 2 here in the end, but we just come right to that first space there between our groups and keep working 3 double crochets in each one across. So let's go ahead and get started here. Skip that 1, come right there in between those 2 stitches and make our first group. So there's 3. And then of course our repeat, skip 3, 3 double crochets in the next space. So I'll see you as we get closer here to the end of row 11. So here we are at the end of row 11, and there are just 2 stitches remaining. So we skip the next stitch and work 1 double crochet right in the top of that very last stitch. So we just gotta get in there. There we go. And then we are done with row 11. So if I lay that out, you can see we've really started to bring those sides in a little bit for our heart. So we've got one more row, row 12, before we split up and do each half of the top of the heart, sort of those bumps. I don't know if there's official names for the parts of a heart. I actually tried to Google it for this, so it would be easier to talk about, but all I could come up with was half of top of heart. So we'll be doing those after row 12. But first, let's start row 12. We've got a chain 3, and then we're going to double crochet in our first stitch just once. And then we are going to skip 3 stitches and jump all the way over here. So we're not going to try and crochet in that space between that 1 double crochet and those 3. We're going to jump right on over to the space between these 2 sets here and start our pattern there again. So again, it's 3 double crochets, skip 3 stitches, 3 double crochets right in between those groups, just as we've been doing before, all the way across until we get to the end. So I will see you when we get closer to the end of row 12. Okay, so as you can see, row 12, we've worked our usual pattern here until we get right to the end. And we, instead of stopping when there are 3 or 2 stitches left, now we stop when there are 4 stitches left, and we're going to jump all the way over to that last stitch to work 2 double crochets right in the top of that turning chain. So just as before, we want to make sure that we skip over that first full group of 3 there in the previous row. So there's 1 and 2, and then that is it for row 12. Row 13 is where we will begin the first half of the top of the heart. So we're going to be working only across the first half of row 12, and then we'll work back and forth for a few rows, and then we'll come back and do the second half of that top. So to begin row 13, we start with a chain 3, just as we did before. And then we are going to skip the next stitch and work 2 double crochets between the previous and the next stitch. So that means we skip the next stitch right there and work right in that space between the second and the third stitches. And right there is where we are going to put just 2 double crochets. So we're still doing more shaping, bringing the sides of our heart in here. So there we are. So we've got our chain 3. Then we skipped the next stitch, work 2 double crochet between the previous and the next stitch. Then we go back to our pattern for just a little bit. Skip 3 stitches and work 3 double crochet between the previous and the next stitch just 3 times. So we're only going to make 3 of those groups of 3. So there's 1, 2, and 3 for the first group. Then 1, 2, and 3 for the second group. And then 1, 2. I'm going to have to get a little bit more yarn here. There we go. And 3 for our third group. There we have it. So now we are going to skip 3 stitches, and between the previous and the next stitch, just 1 double crochet. Right there. Like so. So we had 1 double crochet, then we skipped a stitch and worked 2 double crochets, then 3, 3, 3, and then just 1 right there in that final space. That should be a total of 13 double crochets, and we're going to leave the rest of these stitches from row 12 unworked for now. So now it's time for row 14. To begin row 14, we're going to start as usual with our chain of 3, and then we double crochet in that very first stitch. There we are. Then we skip 3 stitches and work 3 double crochets between the previous and next stitch twice. So we just want to maintain that granny stitch pattern until we get to those edges. So there is 1 group of 3. Get some more yarn off my skein here. And then we'll do our second group of 3. 1, 2, 3. And then we skip 3 stitches and work 2 double crochets between the previous and next stitch. there's 1, 2, and then we skip 2 stitches and work 2 double crochets in the last stitch. So that's the top of that chain 3. I always sort of like to use my hook to get into those chains the right way there. They do take a little extra time, but you can use your favorite substitute if you prefer. There we are. So we have finished row 14 with a total of 12 double crochets. So to begin row 15, we start again with a chain of 3, and then we skip 3 stitches and work 3 double crochets between the previous and next stitch twice. So you'll need to look here. When we skip 3 stitches, that means we're skipping 1 here and 2 here. So that brings us all the way over here for that first group of 3. So there's 1 and 2 and 3 double crochets. And then we skip 3 stitches again and do it again. 3 more double crochets in this space. 1, 2, and 3. Then we're going to skip 4 stitches. So this whole group plus this one right here, and double crochet in just that very last stitch 1 time. Right there. So this is a big move, really getting a lot of the shaping of this heart. There we are. Work that on off. And that's what it should look like at the end of row 15 with a total of 8 double crochets. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Row 16 is the last row of this half of the top of the heart. So we start again with a chain 3, and then we skip the first 3 stitches, or rather the next 3 stitches, and slip stitch between the previous and next stitch twice. So we've already got our chain 3, so that counts as this stitch worked. So we skip these 3, slip stitch right in that space, like so. Chain 3 again, 1, 2, 3, skip 3 stitches, slip stitch right in there. There we go. And then we simply break our yarn and move on to the second half of the top of the heart. So after we've broken our yarn and finished off that stitch, we go ahead and turn the whole heart over again and pick up our end. We're going to be joining right in that same space. You can see right there that that last stitch there was worked into. That's where we want to join, right in the middle of the heart, so we can make that second half of the top. So what we're going to do is join with a double crochet. So I've got let me get this out of the way here a little bit so it's easier to see. I've got the end of the yarn here in my hand, and I've secured it with my non-hook holding fingers. And then I am going to wrap the yarn around my hook twice. Then I will insert the hook right in that space where I want my stitch, yarn over and pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through 2, and yarn over and pull through 2. So really it's just kind of behind that one. That's how I like to join for a standing double crochet. But if you'd prefer to join with a slip stitch and chain 3, you can do it however you'd like to do it. After that, we are going to skip 3 stitches and work 3 double crochets between the previous and next stitch 3 times. So we're basically working sort of the opposite of what we did before to create a mirror image here on the second half of our heart. So because these rows are the shaping's different for the inside rather than the outside edges of the heart, these instructions are all written out differently from the first half of the top of the heart. So you do need to follow the instructions for the second half here. So let's see, we have our join with our double crochet. Then we have 3 double crochets between the previous and next stitch twice. We need it once more. Total of 3 times here as we get started with row 17. So there's 2 and 3. And then we skip 3 stitches and work 2 double crochets between the previous and next stitch. So there's 1 and 2. And then we skip the next stitch and simply double crochet in the very last stitch, right in the top of that chain 3. There we are. And that is what the heart should look like at the end of row 17. To begin row 18, we start, of course, with our chain 3, and then we double crochet in the very first stitch. There we go. Then we skip 2 stitches and work 2 double crochets between the previous and next stitch. So we skip those 2 and work 2 double crochets right there. So there's 1 and 2. Alrighty. And then we work our repeat where we skip 3 stitches and work 3 double crochets in between the previous and next stitch twice. So skip on over and do 2 groups of 3. There is 1. And there's the second one. So there's 1, 2, and 3. There we are. Then we are going to skip 3 stitches and work 2 double crochets right in the very last stitch. So that's the stitch we joined with. So if you joined with a slip stitch and chain 3, then you would work these last 2 double crochets in there. Or forgot to yarn over first. That would be helpful. Or if you worked a, however you wanted to do it, however you wanted to make your double crochet there, then we just go ahead and work our last 2 stitches here right in the top of it. Whoops, let me try that one again. There we go. Alrighty, so that's what it should look like at the end of row 18 with a total of 12 stitches in row 18. Only 2 rows left to finish off our heart before we get to the border. So we begin row 19 with a chain of 3 again. And now we're going to skip 4 stitches. So we skip that next one right there and all of these 3, and then work 3 double crochets right in between those groups there. So there's 1, 2, and 3. Then we skip the next set of 3 and work another set of 3. So 1, 2, and 3. Then we go ahead and skip over those last 3 stitches and work a double crochet in the very last stitch. There we are. At the end of row 19, we should have 8 stitches. So let me get that hook out of there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So row 20 is our goofy row again, where we start with a chain 3, and then we skip 3 stitches and slip stitch in that first space there. There we go. Chain 3 again, 1, 2, 3, and slip stitch after the next 3. And then we can go on to our border. So don't cut your yarn. You'll be able to go straight to the border from here. But that's what it should look like. Lay it out a little bit there when we have finished row 20. So to make the border, I like to chain 1 and turn, or turn and chain 1, however you like to do it, so that we're working back across the top of row 20 before we work down the side of our heart here. What we're going to do is we're going to work 3 single crochets in each of the next 2 chain 3 spaces. So remember we had those chain 3s and slip stitches? We're just going to go right into those chain 3 spaces with 3 single crochets in each one of them. So there's 1, 2, 3, and then 3 in the next one. 1, 2, and 3. Then we work 3 single crochets in the side of the next row. So different people like to work their borders in different ways. For this pattern, I chose to work all the way around each of those stitches on the side. You can see right here on the original, I didn't try and split those stitches, those chain 3s or those double crochets. I just went right on around them. And that's one of the reasons I chose to use chain 3s instead of a fancier stitch or double crochet substitute. So here we are in the side of our first row. I'm going to go ahead and work 3 single crochets right around that double crochet there at the end. So there's that one. Then I'm going to work 2 single crochets in the side of the next row and 3 single crochets in the side of the row after that twice. So we just go 1 and 2 in the side of the next row. And then we come on down to the next row and do 1, 2, 3. If you follow the line of double crochets just right along the edge there, you'll know each time you come to a new double crochet, you've come to another row. So now I've got 2 in that row and then 3 in the next. So 1, 2, 3. Then we are going to work 2 single crochets in the side of each of the next 10 rows. So 1 and 2 for 1, and 1 and 2 for 2. And sometimes, let's see, just got to make sure. I'm actually going to move these down a little bit. These went a little higher into the side of that row than I like. So let's move those down. Get that back on my hook there. I always talk about working into the edges a little bit of an art as much as it is a science. I'm always willing to pull back and say, you know what, I don't love the way that particular stitch laid. Let's put it in a slightly different portion of the row. So you should always feel free to do that. Really sort of put those stitches along the side where they look good to you. And if you find that as you're making these stitches, your cloth really wants an extra stitch or it wants a stitch less, feel free to adjust the number of stitches here along the side. This is just what I found worked out well for me. You may want to work your sides a little bit differently. So I've got to be getting close. I'm going to have to go back here and count since now that I chatted a little bit, I lost my count. So we've got, let's see, 3 up here. So it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we've got 3 more, which makes sense because that brings us all the way down to the point. So we're basically working 2 single crochets in the side of each row until we get down to this point here. So there we are. You can see this is our first row here. I'm going to go ahead and work right around this double crochet on this side for 2 single crochets. And then that brings us right down here to this point, our very first chain where our slip knot is and everything. So right in that very first chain, we're going to put a few more stitches, 3 single crochets right into that chain. So right that very first chain you made at the beginning of the pattern. 1, 2, and 3. There we are. So now we're ready to work our way up the opposite side here. And of course, we're going to be doing the opposite of what we did here. So the first things first, 2 single crochets in the side of each of the first 10 rows. And that includes that very first row right here. So there's 1 and 2, and 1 and 2. And you guys keep working on yours, and I'll see you after we have finished the sides of these 10 rows right here. So now I've worked my way along the sides of the first 10 rows here, so we're ready to do a little bit more shaping here as we come up along this curve. So what we're going to do is work 3 single crochets in the side of the next row and 2 in the side of the row after that twice. So kind of like we did before on the other side. So we've got 1, 2, 3 in the side of that row, and then 1, 2 in the side of that row, and then 1, 2, 3 inside of the side of the next row, and then finally 1 and 2 in the side of that row. Then we go back to our instructions here. We have 3 single crochets in the side of the next row, which you can see here. I can see right there is the end of my yarn. This is the side of that last row before we had those chain 3s and slip stitches. So I'll work 3 single crochets right there. 1, 2, and 3. And then, just as before, we are going to work 3 single crochets in each of the next 2 chain 3 spaces. So remember, those are in between those slip stitches. So if you haven't woven in your ends yet, like I haven't here, you can sort of hold on to that if it makes it a little easier to get right into that chain 3 space for at least that first couple stitches there. There's 2, and then 3. There we go. And then we jump over to that next chain 3 space right there above that set and do 3 more. 1, 2, and 3. Let me get my yarn ready here. And now we're ready to start working down in the center of that V. We sort of started at those chain 3s on this side, get that fuzzy off there, and we worked our way all the way around. So now we're ready to do the center of that, the break in the top of our heart here. So what we're going to do is we are going to work 3 single crochets in the side of the next row. So just working our way right on down here. So there's 1, 2, and 3. Then 2 single crochets in each of the next 2 rows. So there's 1, 2, and 1, and 2. Now this brings us right down here to where we joined or were finished, depending on which side of the heart we were working on. So what we want to do is we want to single crochet 2 together in the same row and the next row. And that's going to create that really great sort of point or divot that we want in the middle of our heart. So we're going to go right back in that same space again and pull up our loop, jump on over here to the side of the next row and pull up a loop and work a really nice, tight single crochet 2 together. Don't be afraid to go ahead and tug down on this. We're not going to be working back into that stitch. It doesn't need to be nice and open. We want it to be a really nice, tight decrease right there. So then we continue working on up the other side here. So we need 2 more single crochets in the side of this row. So that's what we had, remember, before our single crochet 2 together there at the valley, the center of our heart. Then 2 single crochets in the side of the next row. Find that double crochet there to work around. There's 1 and 2. And then finally, 3 single crochets in the side of that very last row right there. We've come all the way around our heart with our border, and it's just giving it a really nice finished edge. So to go ahead and finish that off, before I join, I actually like to cut my yarn a little early. There we are. And then just pull right up on the hook there. Okay, so I will go ahead and put my yarn here on the yarn needle, and then I'm going to do a seamless join to finish this off. If I wanted to maintain my stitch count, if I wanted a particular number of stitches, I would actually go to the second stitch here, but because we don't need a particular number of stitches, this is our final border, I'm just going to go right under the top 2 loops of that very first single crochet we made and pull that loop through. And I want it to be about the size of the tops of my other stitches here. I'm going to go right back in to the center of the last stitch with my needle and pull that through. And you can see how that looks exactly like the other stitches. So if you need to, you can kind of adjust the size of that till you're just real happy with how it looks. And then you've got a great seamless finish without any joins or knots. After that, you can just weave in your ends like you normally do. And that's how to crochet the heart-shaped cloth. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope you'll give this pattern and Red Heart Scrubby Smoothie a try. Thanks so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.